Welcome, tervetuloa. You will listen to the arcane of Terran reproduction, first iteration, with visuals by Isidora Spasic-Lebovic, black-throated diver samples by Lars Denius and Tero Linjama, and Jauhinkivi stone mill from Kuralan Kylämäki. It is a listening session, so you can really make yourself comfortable. I will speak and put some sounds for about 50 minutes, and after that we can talk. Everyone ready? Comfortable? Okay. Let's rock. Spectres are haunting each and every pore of techno-societies. The spectres of Earth others, those turned into debris, piles, waste, the tailings, left behind by the powers of extraction, who rush only forward. However, the tales are here to stay. Once upon a time, a people from the shores of Danube River climbed the mountains. Stone in hand, they swung against stone, made their way inside their flanks. Following the blue glitters in the surface, they opened the veins of the red metal, then undid the crystal structures. Metal started to flow again, their eyes captivated by the unearthed shine, souls possessed by desires stronger than anything they've known before. Earth started to leak, at first quietly. And it continues. 6,000 years later, just a few hills south, I felt being pulled in by the gravity of bottomless terraces eating deeply into the strata. busy with huge trucks carrying the ore. Into the mills, the flotations, the smelters. Sorting the valueless and the valuable. To feed the circuits of power and thirst. The dust rises and settles after the explosions. Yet, Tilvarosh, the Red Hill, I cannot forget your bonds, forged through eons, now in billions of pieces, blown in the wind. And it continues. Some say no, some say stop. To extract or to get extracted. This is the binary, the power imperative, hanging over many earth beings. The choice is mostly not theirs, ours to make. The frontiers are cut through bodies by the interconnected powers of geology and empire, technology, finance, and law. Extractivism is not a simple branch of industry, mining, forestry, or metallurgy. It is a language, a framing of the world, an all-over classification and management of bodies. Extractivism is a shapeshifter in constant transformation, albeit with recurring protocols that disclose its footprints. Chilean economist Alberto Acosta characterizes extractivism as, quote, those activities which remove large quantities of natural resources that are not processed or processed only to a limited degree, especially for export. Extractivism is not limited to minerals or oil. Extractivism is also present in farming, forestry, and even fishing. Acosta sees extractivism as a mode of accumulation which began to be structured with the conquest and colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Karl Marx, in Capital Volume 1, called these processes primitive accumulation, a fundamental stage in the development of capitalism. As argued more recently by Yellowknife Dene Glenn Coulthard, primitive accumulation is not a historical phase, but an ongoing activity of advanced capitalism and a permanent constant of a settler colonial state. It is reaching new proportions as we speak. To recognize extractivism, to see it at work in many places under different names, here I name its operations. 1. Frontier making, prospecting, mapping of a new body deposit. 2. Enclosure, unilateral propertying of the body. 3. Non-consensual penetration and appropriation. 4. Abstraction, cutting into parts and their valuation, marketization. And last but not least, 5. Tails, leaving behind traces and marks, holes in land, minds, and bodies. Extraction is normal. It happens around the clock. As in case of everything socially normal, behind it there is a long history of its normalization. No one has been born extractivist. There are many beginnings and ends. Advent of the age of copper, discovery of bronze, transition to iron, the establishment of agriculture in the Neolithic. But only with European colonial modernity we can speak of extractivism as a subjectivity and as a world project. Feminist analysis of historical transition to capitalism reveal the coming of age of extractivism. Caroline Merchant, in The Death of Nature, documents how in the 1500s and 1600s across Europe, rural populations understood nature as organism. human subjects were part of a relational ontology of forces involving natural bodies. These thoughts and related natural magic were reformed or extirpated through modern science philosophy, disciplining of wage labor, and witch hunts. Silvia Federici in Caliban and the Witch recounts how the bourgeois mind reduced nature to a great machine and, as part of the same move, proletarian bodies to cogs and wheels. Quote, emptied of occult forces, the bodies and their behavior now could be calculated, organized, technically thought, and invested of power relations. Proletariat is rendered a mechanic, which means less than intellectual body, and nature is made into inert, which means less than living matter, which then becomes resource open to extraction and endless accumulation. The witch hunts, expulsions from land, and proletarianization of European peasantry, and colonization of indigenous peoples and lands are structurally connected. Both are imbued with sexism and classism. The important distinction lies in another core technique of European modernity: racism and its logistics of violence. As Catherine Yusuf explains, the perceived problem of workforce for Imperial Portugal in 1400s was infamously solved by equating black bodies to matter, which then could be propertied, bought and sold to populate the mines and plantations of the Americas. This propertying, following Yusuf, is closely related to the coeval enclosure and classification of geological matter. Slavery has a long history before the conquest of Americas, but colonial expansion brings about the vertiginous acceleration and a necropolitical conjunction of racism, sexism, and extractivism. Mines and plantations, grounded in forced labor and slavery, dungeons of absolute extraction, are the motor of the nascent bourgeoisie and allied aristocracies of Europe. Jointly, they formed extraction empires, many still firmly in place. This modern imperial capitalist ideology is based on what Wall Plumwood calls the logic of dualism, an oppositional pairing of terms whereby one is inferiorized against the other. Furthermore, following Plumwood, when terms are linked through, quote, equivalences or mapping between the pairs, they forge a web or network of oppressions, end quote, that captures bodies and agencies different from the standard. Plumwood calls this the logic of dualism, also the logic of colonization. Dualisms are mental social hierarchies, allowing the subject, the master, the patriarch, the investor, to cut, penetrate, select, and extract. Hierarchical racist dualism is the ideology of extraction as supremacy, as domination of the earth and its beings, the core operation of the capital, of the colony, of the nation-state. This modus operandi is premised on a continuous remaking of the frontier, a relentless drive to break new ground, open new territories of accumulation. It is in full swing today with the Arctic rush for resources, mining booms in Finland and Sweden, the dramatic deforestation of Amazon, and elsewhere. Once upon a time, tar was stripped out from great many tree bodies to feed the empires overseas, and by doing so, sinking the forest dwellers deep into debt, turning deadly when the hunger years came. The hunger land it got called. Dispossessed, exported, and it continues. In 2000s, bacterial communities were yoked to metabolize the rock, to extract the prized metals from a hill. Riches generated as if by engineering sorcery. But one day, in the mine, a tailing pond leaked. Uranium and toxins spread into the waterways, northbound and southbound. The company changed name, the accounts were cleaned. But it keeps leaking, drop by drop. Disasters are coming. Many say stop, many say no. Extractivism has many faces, some more hidden than others. In extraction empires, academia is partially involved in digging, art is too. Specialists are expected to take from those who offer their skill or wisdom and run away with the so-called discovery, largely without due consultation and agreement of the subjects of knowledge. To then insert the findings into the circuits of globalizing art and knowledge, thus circumscribing properties of the subject through an enclosure into ownership. Intellectual property is perhaps the most pervasive modality of fencing in of the living and the non-living. It sharply splits the north from the south, the center from the periphery, the overdeveloped and the underdeveloped. Through paywalls, prototypes, codes and litigation. Knowledges are collective bodies, fragile as the fleshly ones. Sometimes they do not survive these violent operations. Propertying and containerization leads to epistemicide, another form of ecocide. In extraction empires, at a time when the so-called natural resources seemed to be running short, new lands were discovered. Information and communication technology gurus found a way to merge the extraction of land with the mining of data. They began to prospect and appropriate the cognitive and affective territories of the liberal subject. This invention, to use the term highly valued in those lands, bypassed the gloomy voices which told of limits to growth or planetary boundaries. Instead, the subjects afforded a connection to the incorporated internet, shared more and more for free. In a double pincer move, extractivism put claims on data and bodies. By reducing the cognitive and the bodily into information, thus accomplishing the fantasy of early cyberneticians, and by propertying these micro-labors of clicking, of sharing, of searching, of thinking, while supposedly liberating them. This informational wealth, embossed in mineral and human bodies, would grow almost effortlessly, almost naturally. So would subtle and not so subtle banality of everyday extraction. These far-reaching activities consume massive energies, comprehensively backgrounded in black boxes and clouds. The wager of informational extractive double-bind is that bodies will make it through the day, the month, the year, with only a bare minimum of social services and only occasional salary. That there will be just enough consensus to keep going, and that eventually there will be technological leaps to finally overrun the always uncomfortable dependency on labor. Just enough clicks to train artificial intelligence, just enough fossil power to perform the transition into green energy. In extraction empires, frontiers were drawn through hearts and households. Love got enclosed within four walls, policed with racial lines, circumscribed to the species, manipulated through class, instrumentalized through sexual difference. To compel the secluded to carry water from the wells, to mend the clothes, to change the diapers, to feed and nurture the bodies for the industry. Some were freed, but conditionally. Free to negotiate the dealings of the free market, the binaries of gain and loss. The market internalized and totalized into all our relationships, with neighbors, colleagues, familials. Enclosure and instrumentalization of love has always been an essential ore for extraction. The network society, the information economy, the cultural capital, the green tech are shaped by the imperative, extract or get extracted. Human labors are pitched against earth beings. Offered are either jobs or clean water, all made prisoners under open sky. Before and beyond these hegemonic narratives, from the colonies, Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, Albert Memmi, and others tell us how power dehumanizes the ones that colonize, dehumanize, wield mighty weapons. In the margins of shiny screens and retweets, numerous species fade silently. Entire environments vanish. Climate breaks down, culture caves in, fascism reawakens. The many fallouts of extractivism. But listen, even more are countless are resistances, fictions. Many times, we stood amidst the ruins left by the explorers, where a mineral body was mapped, first as a prospect, then a reservation, where the state-owned giant began in 1960, made a long cut in the greenstone, where nothing grows, where others followed in their steps, pursuing dreams of turning all that had been solid into shining bars. A world accounted in which everyone does not count. In peace for the moment, the rocks are gathering. The black-throated diver's brook runs between stones and birches, at times murmuring, at times almost quiet. The fish and the birds follow its twists and turns. The brook passes the rocks overturned by the gold chasers. The geological frontier, 11 steps wide, dividing who stays and who goes. But a spill knows not these lines. Arsenic from the golden ore and water may yet mix. The great minority of beings have never been extractivist, neither would they. Deep in the oceans, in the strata, in the backwoods, around the fireplaces through the night, amongst the blades of grass, in broad as daylight, listen. Earth others are at work, patiently, vigorously. We will have been supported, sustained, hosted by many. It does not just happen. Feelings and sensations made by labors in bodily mode. Enter the hewers of wood and the drawers of water, the lumpen proletarians, the wretched, the witches, the bodies of difference, transcorporeal, viscously porous, traversed by toxicity, vulnerability, exposed. Yet resisting the foundational fantasy of the independent modern subject, uninterested in survival at another's cost. Through debility and disability, offering hospitality, solidarity, the social bodies, radiating curiosity, yearning, getting involved with neighbors and strangers from afar. How do we, they manage to cope and thrive is mystery, but only when observed from above, from the capital, from the drone. The arcane of Earth reproduction is out in plain air, an open secret, they, you, we whisper. It goes something like this. I do a hell of a lot of washing, cleaning, cooking, renewing, supporting, preserving, etc. Spells, mira lader manukeles. Knees, elbows, paws, leaves, deep in housework and care work, of homes that are not fortresses. Touch the rock, touch the sweat. Generations and generations of sisters, outside as within. In feminist materialist tradition, the proletarian body is steeped in reproductive labor. There are multiple understandings of the term, developed by feminist critics upon the initial formulation by Karl Marx. Reproductive labor is the constitutive outside, yet the underside, the primary condition of production, the often unpaid or underpaid, always invisibilized work. Care, affective labor, subjectivation, community making. The crucial dynamics of devaluation of reproductive labor within capitalism has been its qualification as natural process, which historically supported hierarchical genderization of labor, enclosing the feminine and minorities inside the home and creating a masculine waged worker. cutting a class-gender division within the household or within the same person. Home place as a site of resistance and liberation struggle, Bell Hooks thus conveys practices of African American women on the plantation and afterwards. Home, oikos, and housekeeping are built into the very name of one of the radical sciences of modernity, ecology. Ernst Haeckel, the founder of the discipline, perhaps unwittingly, had a prescience to relate ecology to housekeeping. Homemaking as a deep meaning of ecology speaks closely to another aspect of reproductive labor, social reproduction. Feminism understands social reproduction as the regeneration of labor force, which also implies regeneration of the social to which the worker belongs. This twofold meaning also points at what Nancy Fraser calls, quote, a deep-seated social reproductive crisis tendency or contradiction. On the one hand, social reproduction is a condition of possibility for sustained capital accumulation. On the other hand, capitalism's orientation to unlimited accumulation tends to destabilize the very processes of social reproduction on which it relies. End quote. Labors of care and maintenance are always ongoing. They are the condition of the living, the vegetal, the animal, the earth others. But they are directly visibilized by extractivist logic. Modernity has been a long process of forgetting to notice the labors of world-making, of earth others, as Anna Tsing tells. To notice reproduction in act is only possible while participating in it. Peter Linebaugh exclaims, quote, commons is invisible until it is lost, end quote. Commons is invisible because it is the social. It has been given and we have been invited. Reproductive labor is made of relational, affective, subtle threads, easily lacerated. At this moment, in the Euro-American part of the world, the contradiction between social reproduction and capital growth is deepening. Reproduction is increasingly externalized to the workers themselves through the dismantling of social security systems where they existed at all. Labor in numerous sectors is being informalized and precaritized, putting in peril reproduction. The profitable contradiction is that digital service and leisure economies are all grounded in affective labor, the primitive accumulation of affect, communication abilities, the so-called immaterial, which means easy to devalue, labor of relationality. Capital plugs into reproduction with the promise of facilitating more affect, more connectivity, but its interest lies elsewhere. These inroads into labor power's reproduction are paralleled with an intensifying rush for natural resources, from the Arctic to the asteroids, intensification of land grabs in the north and in the south, and striking devaluation of food production and social services such as education and care. These multiple frontier movements are materially and discursively tangled. The current climate and ecological emergency, as amply documented, makes it painfully clear that extractive capitalist colonialism stages an assault on the domain of social reproduction of Earth. Queer feminist new materialism sees nature as the domain of sociality, a more than human social, as formulated by Anna Tsing. Ecology itself thinks the world in these terms. These insights from science studies are another way of expressing, in Western terms, the tenets of indigenous and land-based knowledges, that society involves relations with other than human beings, and that nature itself is a social place. A more than human multi-species understanding of sociality leads to the reconfiguration of the notion of community. Not anymore a gated reality based on exclusions and inclusions and self-identification, but, with Silvia Federici, quote, as a quality of relations, a principle of cooperation and of responsibility to each other and to the earth, the forests, the seas, the animals. End quote. Forms of cooperation and responsibility stretch beyond the species, the arbitrary division of bios and geos, life and non-life. This going beyond the boundaries speaks of commoning as essential part of reproduction, as can be observed in everyday practices of lichen, fungi, vegetables, pollinators, and others, which do not respect their biological kingdoms and families. Lynn Margulis's theory of symbiogenesis challenges the still prevailing narrative of evolutionary competition in favor of collaboration. Even the minerals, apparently so immovable, are pushed far out from stasis through their relationship with life, as the theory of mineral evolution shows. According to this proposal by Robert Hazen and others, about 2/3 of mineral species on this planet have come into being through interaction with biotic processes. This does not take away that multi-species communities are full of tensions and confrontations. However, as Murray Bookchin claims, in nature or multi-species socius, we cannot speak of domination and hierarchy such as they exist in city or nation states, colonialism, extractivism. Hierarchies are specifically human techniques with massive effects on all sorts of beings. The current climate and ecological breakdown can be seen as the severing of the existing texture of social reproduction. Extractivism takes straight out from the processes of Earth's reproduction, and it leaves toxic ponds and piles of waste behind. Now, this does not go unnoticed. Elizabeth Povinelli conveys the Aboriginal Carabing analytics of the world as based on mutual attention between things, animate and inanimate. This attention is not a given. Forces and bodies can, quote, turn away from each other, withdrawing care from each other, end quote. This is a form of revolt in itself, actions which may have dramatic consequences for all sides involved. However, please note, withdrawing comes afterwards. What comes first is great curiosity, yearning, opening. Attention and care are the core of Terran politics. ballasts, the overburden, the heaps do not go anywhere, do not leave. Shimmering, organizing, returning, they are here to stay, through the disaster to the storm, as a ghost, as a sign, as an alliance. Struggles to defend and remake healthy land, clean waters and air happen along the pipeline routes, proposed airport sites, mining projects, and they take places in classrooms, household, workplaces. To these latter, perhaps less dramatic sites of extraction and friction, I turn now. Places where what Nancy Fraser calls boundary struggles take place. The boundary struggles to redraw the lines between production and reproduction, economy and society, society and terrestrial others. Space-times where to work for Terran loves, Terran knowledges, Terran unions. 3 propositions. 1. Earth has 1,000 sexes, yet nation-states and capital negotiate only with gendered citizens. From ecofeminism in the 1970s up to recent queer ecology, gender has been firmly placed as central to the social construction of the concept of nature. Through these efforts, discussions and struggles for sexual freedom and gender anti-normativity are made inseparable from climate and earth justice. Karen Barad, drawing on ways of being of, for example, electrons in quantum field, insists on nature's queer performativity. Terran bodies are in incessant experimentation with mutual boundaries, destabilizing ideas of fixed or self-contained identity. Nuclear heteronormative family has been shown as one of the main frames of perpetuation of the nexus between patriarchy and capital. In this context, multi-species modes of family or kin-making, to say it with Donna Haraway, or ecosexuals, can be seen as another tactical tool for climate and earth justice organizing. In my view, these speculative or poetic proposals should be joined with legal experimentation and processes, extending the arenas of wild law debates. What would an adoption of an invertebrate, marriage to a mineral formation, or rather getting adopted by an algal community, imply on the level of multi-species jurisprudence and politics? What happens to the social issues concerning shared quotidian life, rights, responsibilities, ownership? For example, recent advances in plant intelligence studies, embodied and queered, provide some possible paths towards intimate and responsible engagement with plants. But before embracing plants full-on, from the plant sciences we may learn that touching is a particularly sensitive territory and is far from given that it is indeed pleasurable or desirable for the vegetal bodies. This and other complexities of multi-species sociality and intimacy, the queerness and sensitivities of Terran bodies, their 1,000 sexes and sexualities, would entirely transform the dynamics and comfort zones of the humanist social. We would witness profound reworkings of how informed consent, responsivity, proximity, intimacy look and feel like. Two, Earth knows, but it does not know property regimes. Feminist science studies open to non-standard modes of boundary struggle against extraction within arts and academia. Posthumanist theory of performativity, as developed by Karen Barad, claims the practices of being and knowing are mutually entangled. Knowledge is an entanglement through which, quote, a part of the universe makes itself intelligible to another part, End quote. Likewise, this ethico-epistemology, how Barat calls it, brings together queer and feminist insights in a shared conversation with quantum physics, transgressing the so-called cultural and natural domains. Intelligibility demands ability to respond, responsibility, and accountability. It is a mutual bonding. Barat specifies that, quote, scientific practices are not merely practices of knowing, and the knowledge produced is not only ours, end quote. Multi-species knowledge is not only ours, it is no one's. It is enacted, commoned. Barat's ethico-onto-epistemology is not simply a philosophy of science. It bears direct consequences for property regimes upon which current academia as well as art are based. What does it mean to practically take on the idea that subjects of knowledge are partners in knowledge production? In a modern human social, academic papers and artistic performances should involve other than human bodies as co-authors, co-performers in every possible sense. This, however, does not amount to a simple inclusion within the previously humanist fields, which I believe most likely is not of great interest to Terran beings. There are far deeper implications. In modern regime of science, knowledge is intellectual property, a legal fact. Therefore, as entangled co-authors, Terran beings turn out to be legal subjects. This status then carries important reverberations for all other interactions between humans and them, such as those involving environmental disputes, matters of life and death. But what is this law capacious to be responsible to such a variety of beings? Feminist science studies thus joins in conversation with wild law and earth jurisprudence, law, philosophy, and practice concerned with advocating legal rights for other than humans. Its paramount manifestation to date is the Universal Declaration of Rights of Mother Earth in 2010 and the adoption of these principles in the constitutions of Ecuador and Bolivia. Importantly, wild law uses the notion of legal subjecthood, thus seemingly playing into hands of modern state capital recognition. However, Terran rights and multitudes cannot be contained within modernity. Wild law is a walk back to the wild side, to the uncontainable queer mycelium. Three, movements of labor make and unmake the Terran social. Labor movements can help to keep it free. If a general praxis of earth beings can, with significant queerings, be seen as unpaid labors of maintenance and commoning, modes of social reproduction of earth, this transforms the proletariat and its class composition. For example, an essential ideological tool for establishing new mines is the promise of job creation. Mineral deposits are often found in semi- and peripheral areas of the north or in the global south, zones already heavily under or de-developed. These communities bear the heavy toll of the extractivist imperative and its tailings and disasters. Extractivism, through the promises of jobs, tries to turn the workers against earth others. But relations of precariousness leak across species and non-lifelines. These exposures point to shared material and affective histories and futures. The non-living are not against the living. The living do not need to be against the non-living. Such are power imbalances within extractive capitalism that a food grower might have vulnerability precariousness, desire, closer to the land she inhabits, and much farther from the interests of an engineer or a manager, supposedly of the same species. Exposure, fragility, porosity are queer spaces of class organizing and belonging, where aerial, organic, inorganic, watery, proletarian bodies, aerobio-geo-aquatariat, maintain, sustain, reproduce communities of commons. Class in the multi-species social is land-based, composed within the local bodies and forces, and follows the pathways of life and non-life, which makes these alliances always translocal. Aerobio-geo-aquatariat rises from the soil, runs through the waters, sweeps with the wind. A molecular and planetary decolonial border thinking and doing, to speak with Walter Mignolo and Gloria Anzalduan. Unions have never been only human. Terran unionizing is a transgression of extractivist imperative, which always aims to split and divide. Unionizing is seeking queer ways of getting along through difference, collective organizing of earthly survival. Terran sexualities, knowledges, unionizing, arts of social reproduction of earth, remember, unforget, summon, converse to, listen to, the specters of those who have been extracted, of those who are yet to come to be, responding to those that have and will have supported you and me, the living and the non-living. Earth is the social, or nothing at all. Thank you.